This recording is dedicated to the memory of Howard Kalin. Flow!
Welcome to episode 130 of the See Here podcast. My name is Maurice Bushtinsky. I'm here in Melbourne. Over in Cape Cod is my wonderful friend, Ms. Kerry Fristo.
Hello.
And over in Brantford, Ontario is my other wonderful friend, Mr. Tim Merrill.
Punk rock in Germany lives.
We have a very exciting show for you. We've just gotten off the dog and bone speaking to the director Ido Fluk, and he has come out with an incredible film, which I've been waiting, it seems like many, many years to see, but in reality, it's only been a year. The film is called Koln 75, and it's about the story of Keith Jarrett, and yet sort of not. If you are familiar with the biggest selling jazz piano album ever, it's called The Koln Concert by Keith Jarrett. This film is about how that album came to be. But unlike a lot of other music biopics or music films, this does not solely focus on the artist. It focuses on the promoter. And there's a very good moment in the intro of the film that says, that's talking about the Sistine Chapel. And it says, this film is not about the Sistine Chapel. It's about the scaffolding. And what a brilliant metaphor for how this story carries out. I'm not going to go through the story of the Koln Concert here because that's what this interview is going to be about. So what we're going to do is play the trailer, and then we'll come right back with our discussion with Ido Fluk about all things Keith Jarrett and punk rock and jazz and improvisation and the spirit of entrepreneurship and passion for music.
You need to see this movie.
We have spoken, and it will be coming your way in due course. So we'll be back at the end of the interview to talk about what will be happening in the next episode of See Here.
Will Keith play?
Vera, Sie haben Dutzende Jazzkünstler nach Köln gebracht. Wie kommt eine junge Frau wie Sie mit so vielen Musikern in Kontakt?
Wie machst du das bloß? Was? So tun, als ob dir der Laden gehört. Keine Ahnung, ich tu halt so.
How old are you?
25.
Lieben tut man, solange man jung ist.
Ich bin Konzertveranstalter. I'm booking a tour for the Ronnie Scott Trio.
Wenn du in deinem Leben was erreichen willst, dann musst du verdammt noch mal einen anderen Weg einschlagen.
He's a dentist.
Was glaubst du, wo du jetzt hingehst?
Berlin, Jazztage. Ich bin Montag wieder zurück. In Berlin, I saw Keith Jarrett play for the first time. Ich will ein Konzert organisieren für Keith Jarrett. Ich werde den Saal füllen.
Jazz ist Museumsmusik. Jazz ist tot.
Kein Jazzkonzert, ein Keith Jarrett-Konzert.
Complete improvised freedom. No one knows where this is headed.
Selbst wenn das letzte Instrument auf der Welt wäre, Keith wird nicht drauf spielen.
Keith Jarrett wird in der Kölner Oper nicht auf einem kaputten Scheißklavier spielen. Klavierstimmer, vor allem kommen Sie mit!
Artists like Keith show up once a generation.
Über mich scheitern sehen.
Das können sie nicht machen.
Ich habe keine Wahl.
Music can wake us up.
Maybe that's what good music can do.
Du bist Vera Brandes. Aber wenn irgendwer hier einen Weg findet, dann bist du das doch.
Welcome back to See Here podcast, and Kerry, Tim and myself are thrilled to have join us on the show the director of a wonderful new film about the famous story about Keith Jarrett and Vera Brandes called Koln 75, 50 years after the story happened. So it's a wonderful 50th anniversary present for Keith Jarrett fans, music fans around the world. But it is not really purely a story about Keith Jarrett, as we'll get into the discussion. So welcome to the show, director Ido Fluk.
Thank you so much.
Thanks
for having me.
Thank you very much for being had. Congratulations on the release of Koln 75. And before we get into talking about the film itself, I just wanted to start with asking you a little bit about your own film origins. You know, what were you watching as a kid? When did your interest come into actually becoming a filmmaker? Were you making short films at home? What did you start watching?
So I was born in Tel Aviv. When I was 6, we moved to Paris, and Paris specifically for a 6-year-old who's not from there, was not such a great experience. So there was a lot of, let's call it downtime, but it was very kind of isolating, let's call it. And I think that's when gravitating towards film started as a means of escape. There's like this famous story about half of the famous directors that they were cold, and the Cinémathèque in Paris was the only place where you could sit in a warm climate for a few hours for a cheap amount of money, because anywhere else you got to spend more to be warm. So I don't have that story for you, but I certainly gravitated to the movies as a way of like just finding my world. So I started watching a lot there, a lot of movies dubbed in French. That's my beginnings. And I just consumed everything, whether it's like French or like American movies that came over. And then I started making films in high school. I was in like a film program, and I won this award.
This was still in Paris, was it?
No, for high school, my parents brought us back to Tel Aviv. And my final kind of formative years were there at the Tel Aviv Cinémathèque, and then making movies there. And then I made a short film in high school that won a director's award at Jerusalem Film Festival. And then armed with that, I came to New York, to Tisch, to NYU. And I just kind of stayed until I couldn't anymore. And I had to go back. And I made my first film back in Israel, which was a tiny, crowdsourced film. In fact, it was the first crowdsourced film ever made over there. It was pre-Kickstarter. And I used to be a journalist, so I kind of knew how to work the media. And because it was the first, we got on the evening news, and, I pitched, come and join us in this adventure. And we had like a PayPal link, and we got them to put it on the bottom of the screen. We wrangled like something like 25 grand.
Wow. So did your mom give you an envelope?
My mom?
The film.
She helped. Everyone helped a little bit.
So I got to say, I had a chance during the week to watch that first film, Af Pam Lo Meuchar Midai, Never Too Late. And in some ways, it's a long way from Koln 75, and yet
sure
both characters, they both have paternal issues. Your character in Never Too Late, he has no idea what he wants to do in life. And Vera Brandes in Koln 75 knows exactly where she wants to go in life. Do you feel that there were things that you learnt from making what was really a very minimalist, very quiet film, very beautiful film? Did you have a direct link between how you made that and things that you took into Koln 75?
Well, that's like comparing end stage of an evolution with a very, very, very early stage, because between that, there was another movie that I made here in the States called The Ticket. And there are a lot of things that happened. I came from Europe, from Tel Aviv, and then from Paris, and I made this type of cinema, and that's the cinema that I grew up on. But I live in New York and have been for many years now. And I think that has shaped me as well as the changes in the way we consume film and the way that the audiences want to consume film. And I think that kind of changed the way you make films. So the first film you could see as a kind of very quiet art house in the art house tradition. It's a road movie in a country that barely has any roads. And I think that was an interesting kind of exploration of that. And then I made my first American film. And I think I had another film set to direct that I wrote that was also kind of in the same wavelength. And that film fell apart right before COVID, or maybe COVID made it impossible to make because the budgets really ballooned with COVID insurance and all of the stuff that were added to anyway a skimpy budget of a film. And I sat at home and I said, well, this fell apart. It happens to everyone, but these are very painful moments because you work on something. I think it's very specific to film, how much work you can actually do on something and having it never happen. You know, you really can spend years putting something together, writing it, researching it, writing it, getting it to a producer, getting the contracts negotiated and signed, casting it. There's so many steps, and then it can fall apart. And that's really heartbreaking because it's years of your life down the drain, and you know, you don't know if it's ever going to come back. So anyway, I was locked in my apartment in Brooklyn, and I was really frustrated. And I said to myself, I'm going to write a film that is the antithesis of all of this. That is a film about the actual act of making something. That is a film about the act of creation, about what makes something good, what makes something interesting, what makes something that stands apart. And I'm going to write it like I've never wrote before, meaning without a plan, without a beat sheet or an outline or a synopsis. You know, all of these preparatory steps that we always do as filmmakers when we set to write, you know, a 120-page script. We plan. And I said to myself, I'm going to just write it like a musician plays, improvisation. And I'm going to let that feeling sip into the film. That was my mindset coming into it.
Well, if I can say something, sir, you must be commended because what you did was fucking astounding. Because to me, the film is not about Keith. It's not about Vera. It's not about the critic. It's about all of it. You got down to the sinew, to the marrow. And, you know, you could be the greatest magician in the world and you could pull off the greatest illusions. But if you don't have an audience, it doesn't matter. It's about all of it. And to me, there's a biological term, symbiotic parasitism, where each of the elements benefit from each other. They take from each other. And that's what brings the whole existence to all of this. I come from a punk rock background, and this film was totally punk rock. That's what I got from this. Right from traveling in the van, trying to get the money together, the club, the gear, all of it. And it's a story that transcends not just punk rock, but I mean jazz, everything. It's about all the elements coming together for each part playing its part. I mean, even the critics, an important element. Keith, obviously, but it all comes together. You know, it's about the symbiotism of it.
I completely agree. Thank you. I always tell people, yeah, it's a film about a jazz concert, but it's a punk rock film. And it stars a punk rock character because there's nothing more punk rock than what Vera Brandes at 16, 17, 18 did. Yeah. And I think people are always surprised to find out that what we show in the film is the real story. I mean, the way that I wrote it is I found her. My producer found her. She was living on a beach in Greece. And we told her, we want to make a film about you. And she said, oh, finally, you know, someone. And it kind of felt like she's been waiting for someone to tell her story. But she was not that easy to kind of get. Like, she played a little hard to get. And I would wake up at 5 a.m. trying to get an interview, waiting for our session. And she wouldn't show up. And I would call her and say, hey, we had a plan. It's 5 a.m. in New York. And she would say, oh, sorry, it's a nice day. So I went to the beach because she was A, testing me to see if I was serious and if I was committed. And B, I think she was showing me the Vera Brandes way, which is like, I'm not working for anyone. I am my own person. And if it's nice outside, I'm going to the beach. Right? We can talk later. So I was persistent enough. And finally, I got to interview her for many, many hours. And I had a tape with like almost 8 hours of interviews. And I wrote the film off of that. So this whole crazy story, it's all true. It's what she told me.
When you look at it today, it almost seems now with everything set into place, it seems impossible that, you know, anybody be able to pull this off with the way media is and the way Ticketmaster and all of these things. It seems like there's no way this could ever happen today. But back in the 70s, things were a little different.
Yeah, you could call someone and put an accent on or pretend you're someone else. And there was no way to Google you quickly. So people just have to believe. And she just pretended she was older, that she was calling from London or from somewhere else. And this whole business about her sneaking downstairs to the dental clinic of her father and making calls from there, it's all true. And, you know, at some point I even became I was like, could all of this be real? She kept another apartment and her parents didn't know about it. And I hired a researcher and I sent them to, archives in Germany to try and find. And one of the stories she tells me, and we have it in the film, is that this tabloid interviewed her and then they took a kind of a sexy photo of her and they had it on the cover and it said, not even 20, already an old jazz rabbit or something like that. We found the actual cover of that tabloid and we were like, okay, she's telling the truth. This is a very, very, very special story.
I got to say that the timing for this, besides it being 50 years since the Koln Concert album first came out, was, for me personally, something incredible. So just as a little bit of a side story, I also host a podcast talking about great albums. And last December, my co-host on that episode of the music podcast and I were discussing as a subject 4 of our favorite ECM albums. And of course, the Koln Concert came up in the conversation. And we're talking about what we liked about it and the motifs, and we told the story behind the concert. I think I said to my show co-host, hey, Ed Ross, if you're out there listening, you know what? This is such a great story. Someone ought to make this into a film. 2 months later, in my YouTube feed comes the trailer for Cologne 75. And I thought, the universe is listening to me.
That's great.
Okay, so you said that you wanted to write a story that was similar in the theme of improvisation, which is what Keith was doing at the time. And you sort of show a bit of the Lausanne concert as well. But
yeah.
When did you first hear this story? I guess the wider question here is, were you a long-time fan of Keith's music? Did you listen to any of his other albums from that period or his Standards trio later on?
I'm not a jazz head. I listen to jazz, but I'm like a Coltrane guy. But there's bigger jazz experts than I am. It's not like where I come from, my type of music per se. Although now, after making this film and kind of studying it for a bunch of years, I'm really into it. But I wasn't back then. I came into it because it told me something about making any piece of art. It told me something about every time we painting, every time we compose a piece, anytime we write something, how the thing that makes it a masterpiece is not the perfect conditions, but rather the mistakes, the obstacles, the improvisation you have to do around it. And I thought to myself, it's really funny because as a film director, you show up every day and there's 5 broken pianos you have to deal with. The actors are late. The cars are not there. There's rain suddenly. The clouds. There are all these things that are outside of your control. And I think what makes us good or not good is not whether we can create the perfect version of the script. It's rather, how do we now face the obstacle and improvise around them so that we can still shoot and make the day, because any day costs who knows how much money, and still make the movie. And I think the greats, that's what they do. They know how to deal with issues. And here was that story. And I said, oh my God, this is great. And I kept thinking, what if Keith Jarrett came to Cologne well rested, happy camper, ate a great meal before the show. The restaurant was great. Everything was perfect. And by the way, on the stage, he would have this perfect, pristine, well-tuned, great attack, Busendorfer, Grand Imperial, just the way his writer asked. Would we remember? Would anyone be talking about the Koln Concert today? That question is the question that led me into this exploration. It all comes back to that.
The improvisation with Keith, I kind of got a feeling from your film with all the characters that there was improvisation in the characters. And what I mean by that is that the way that Vera dealt with every individual was completely different. The way that Keith dealt with every individual was complete. All the characters, it's like that's how we are as human beings. We deal with each other in slightly similar ways with people, but we're all different. Like the way I communicate with you or I communicate with Maurice, it's a different thing, but it still works. And that's the beauty, is that there's this chaos that you can't really replicate, but it comes together when the cosmos, even though the elements might not seem right. And that's the punk rock aspect of it too, because with the Ramones playing CBGBs, maybe, they blew an amp, or maybe, like somebody's guitar was not right, but it was the greatest show you've ever seen because it was warts and all. It was primal. And I think that's what it gets down to with your film, is there's this real primal aspect.
I think it was an attempt to create a script that gave you that feeling. If I made a mistake writing, a great jazz musician, they make mistakes all the time. They play so fast. They make mistakes all the time. It's this weird misconception we have that these guys are perfect players. They constantly make mistakes. The thing that sets them apart is that the greats, when they make the mistake, they then play something that makes the mistake the best part of the piece, right?
Right.
Mistakes are constantly made. It's just about how do we then pivot to make the mistake the centerpiece of the new part, right? I was writing and I said, what is the equivalent to that in writing? And I said, okay, usually when you write and delete. You write and delete. You constantly edit yourself. And I made an effort to not edit so much, to kind of embrace every time I made a mistake. So like you usually write an opening of a film, you say, okay, it's this scene. And then you're like, no, this is completely wrong. And you delete it and then you write something else. But I said, no, I'm going to keep the scene that I wrote that I think is a mistake to open with. But then I'm going to say, oops, false start, let's start again. But I'm going to keep that in the film because I wanted to preserve this energy of freedom, My job as a director is to take that philosophy that I have. Let's say I'm satisfied having delivered it on paper, but now you have 300 people, by the way, a lot of them from Germany, who have a very, very, very specific way of doing things and a very kind of strict work culture and rules that they manage sets around. And it's about telling everyone, hey, no, we're making something else here. We're trying to inject this freedom. And there's nothing that scares the people who actually have to make a film happen more than freedom. Because when you say freedom, they hear cost, they hear extra time, they hear, oh, the cars are parked here, but we want to shoot there. And it's the 70s, so you can't, right? You have to move all the cars. You have to get all the modern signs down from the buildings. You have to paint, you have to everything. There's so much that goes on when you think about a period film, especially in the modern place like Germany.
And I love the fact that what you're talking about with the mistakes, that you actually incorporated it in the film, with the critics talking about the false starts, and with the cramps when he's like, you sit your ass down, we're recording live, you don't stop us at all. Like, I love that you actually explain what the false starts were. And I just thought that was incredible.
Yeah. It's a really fun way to get behind music, right? To learn something we don't know about an artist. And I was also really inspired by, the famous Coltrane line, you want to say something, start in the middle and move in both directions at the same time, which I tried to make the film feel like we're starting somewhere. We're using every kind of different cinematic form. We're breaking the fourth wall. We're going into documentary. archival. Someone talks to, suddenly there's a lecture about jazz. Suddenly, there's like titles. Sometimes it's just like without rules, because I also didn't want to take it too seriously, because I wanted to be playful and accessible and like fun and fast.
Well, you succeeded because, I mean, as I think Tim's going to say, a lot of people are going to think jazz, it's going to be wonky. Yeah. This is so not. And I mean, obviously it's serious. I mean, it's dramatic. There are all these different things going on, but I loved with like when you would switch gears and the title would go boom, Lausanne, and then boom. And then when the journalist guy would walk in and explain jazz and how jazz started and, all this kind of stuff. I just thought that was so cool. It's interesting because I was really into the story. I find the character, the actress too, Mala Emde, she was wonderful. She was very good. And I just was really drawn into the story, but it didn't take me out of the story. It just kind of took me momentarily in a different direction. And then whoop, I went right back in. I don't know. I just thought that was a really cool way of doing it. I don't know. You could say it broke rules, sure, which it does, narrative rules, but a lot of films, I mean, you have a lot of different filmmakers who will throw in a curveball, and then even things like Goodfellas, would have breaking the fourth wall and, Henry Hill's going to tell the story. And
when films employ that, of course, it's a Brechtian device. We've seen it done, but usually an X film has this type of device and that's it, right? They don't use everything. And then also when they use a device, they use it 3 times, right? There's this rule in filmmaking. You establish a device, then you use it in a consistent way. And I said, no, we're going to be completely inconsistent. And by the way, it's a film that establishes a really strong protagonist, Mala Emde, Vera Brandes. You follow her, you fall in love with her, and then you leave her for like 20 minutes and she disappears and you're like, Keith. I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with people before making the film who were like, this is insanity. What is the idea behind this? And I said, that's punk rock. We right. Just like, we go. This is what felt right to me. And my job was to keep that energy, that pressure cooker. When I first wrote it, that's what I wanted to preserve.
Right. Maurice, who's the director of that film, We Are the Best Again? Magnuson?
Oh, I've forgotten the name of the director.
Have you seen this film before, We Are the Best?
No.
Oh, it's a story about 2 young girls. Where was it based, Maurice?
I think Swedish film.
Yeah, I think it's a Swedish film. Well, 2 young girls who decided to start a punk rock band. And how there was just the way they were just drawn into it and they were just so compelled to do this. When I saw Vera and her friend in your film, immediately it took me back to this film, We Are the Best, because it really reminded me, and we covered this in a past episode, it kind of reminds me of the film with Marlon Brando, The Wild Ones, where it says, what are you against? What do you got?
Yeah.
And I love the bit where we're anti-Nazi, where it's just like, and you can see that these 2 girls were trying to basically mold themselves, or at least trying to cling to something that had substance. And I love the fact that you actually, like Can, when the guy's like, you listen to Can? Like Can? And they're like, yeah, what's wrong with Can? And I'm like, you're right. What's wrong with Can? To this day. I mean, if you don't listen to Can, you're not a friend of mine. You know what I mean? I just loved how you incorporated so much in the development of these 2 girls that were friends And this guy just shows up as kind of a loft mate, and then he winds up becoming the boyfriend of Vera's friend. But I just thought it was really great how the two girls, they just come up, and it just so much reminded me of the purity of discovering music and the purity of trying to find your identity and find your place in the world. It was just great.
I think Tim's already sort of going to refer to it. I'd love to go a little bit more through the creative process that you did, because this was, in a way, sort of exposition, but done creatively. And that was the bit with the music critic, the jazz music critic, coming in. And he's not so much telling the story of jazz. He's talking about the story of improvisation. And it starts out saying, right, well, first there were big bands and the solos were carefully constructed and carefully composed. And then we go down to the smaller trios and quartets where someone will get a solo over a composed theme. And then you get the free jazz movement where all these people are trying to basically have a conversation, but nothing is pre-composed. And to do something as a solo musician where you got no one to bounce anything off, that's impossible. And you bring in that classical pianist, said, hey, play something off the top of your head. See, can't do it. It's really, really hard. And he takes those 5 minutes to tell the audience why this story is so important. Because, you know, to people who aren't necessarily musicians or listen to a lot of jazz, maybe will think, well, why is this such a big deal that he's improvising? Yeah, sure, he's making stuff up on the spot. But that whole moment that you did in that breaking of the fourth wall, where he tells the audience, this is why it's important, was just one of the highlights out of many in this film for me. So how did you come to decide to write that in the script as opposed to some other form of exposition?
Well, you know, I had to understand it for myself first. You can listen to this music, you can then read about this music, and somewhere in between, you start understanding what goes into playing jazz, right? Jazz has a side, it's like math. Like there used to be like a math rock, or maybe it's still like math rock, like really complicated or like riffs that are like almost like scientific punk attitude, but into guitar playing. And jazz can fall into that as well. But then at the same time, it's so fast and it's so primal. Like the greats, they don't think. There's no time to kind of analyze. You're just like going, your body, your fingers, your mouth. If you're playing a wind instrument, your hands. If you're playing piano. But what makes Keith special within this realm, and what makes solo improvisation so special? I really wanted to understand it for myself. And so, you know, I got into the theory side of it. I read a lot of like theory, and I read a lot of the process of Keith, by the way, who back then already is talking about channeling something. You know, it's super mystical, the way he conceives of himself as a vessel, almost, as a body that needs to be clear, be pure, be empty completely. And that's why he's, by the way, so sensitive to people coughing or people snapping photos while he plays. He really thinks of himself as just like an opening that channels something that goes into his fingers and then plays the piano. And you can go very deep in that direction, by the way, in a way that I didn't do in the film. I just like kind of gave you the basics, but I wanted to base why it's such an achievement, what he's doing. And it's also, we have to remember, he's playing a concert every other night. And in the case of the Koln Concert, night after night. And the concerts have to be good enough so they are good for the audience that sits there. But also they have to be good enough because he's recording them and they're released as records. So they have to withstand not just the test of that night's audience, they have to withstand the test of forever, being a recorded piece. So I'm trying to tell you, you know, you try and just come up with a song right now that forever will live on a record and will be beloved by so many people, and that you will swear by and stand by. And it's just a Herculean task. But I also didn't want to give you a boring lecture.
Right.
No.
And so this idea of this character that's like a fun music journalist who's like a little self-important in the way that like jazz journalists tend to be, especially back then. You know, I read a lot of like things by François Postif, who was like this great jazz journalist of the time. And you kind of read and you get this feeling that they are very, very, very tweed. They're wearing tweed. They are important in their own minds. And they think about music music in a very specific way, but also we can make fun of them. And that's where Michael Chernus comes in, who, you know, we all watch and love in shows like Severance and a lot of other things, who kind of embodies this character in a beautiful way, I think, because he lets us make fun of him. And he lets us understand that, you know what, Keith is like, he's so serious about all of this. But it's just music, you know? So exactly. And we're allowed to have fun.
Now, I don't know if anybody else got this, but through the film, as I'm watching Keith behind the scenes when he's taking off his truss, his partner, like on the road and everything,
Manfred Eicher,
I really got a feeling that it was almost like I was watching Kurt Cobain.
Yeah.
Because just the way that Kurt Cobain was so sensitive, but then when he got on stage, it was 1,000%. And there was all these people that had so much expectations from him. Like, you know, it's almost like messianic, you know, like this whole kind of thing. But then when you saw the man, he was almost like this fragile baby bird, you know, and that's the funny thing that you show all of, you know.
Yeah.
And the whole thing about even going back to punk rock where, you know, you're thinking, oh, this guy is getting, you know, flown around with caviar and, you know, first class and all this stuff. And then when his assistant says to the critic, well, do you know why we stopped at the airport? Because we were basically pitching in the tickets to get money. And you're like, but he's, yeah, that's the guy, you know?
Yeah.
You're showing kind of the mythology and you're also showing the reality, which I really loved. And the other point I wanted to point out too was there was so much of your film that really spoke to me personally because I promoted shows in the past. I did postering just like Vera did. We dealt with the cops for basically vandalizing. You know, we were fined for vandalizing and throwing up posters on telephone poles and all that. So when I saw that, I was just kind of like, yep, check. Yep, absolutely, 100%. It was just so much. But I really got the feeling that in the van, I really got a feeling of like Kurt Cobain. It was just really interesting.
Yeah, I think it's true to all performing musicians that come from somewhere that, you know, unless you're, I don't know how big.
Yeah.
And even then, your beginnings are always sleeping on someone's floor, playing shows for gas money, and usually adding your own money to it these days. Keith is really touring Europe back then in a tiny car. That was actually the model that they drove in, and just with Manfred Eicher. And by the way, we forget, but back then he's down and out, and there's no audience for his music in the U.S. and he has to go to Europe.
What was funny was when they were in the van, I could almost hear the Ramones like, hurry, hurry, get me to the show. You know, like it was just,
I want to be sedated.
Really had that. Yeah, exactly. Here's another thing too, is the fact is when Vera goes into the radio station and she's telling the guy how to promote it. And she goes, tonight at 11 o'clock, you're going to see something that you've never seen before. Like nobody could get away with that shit today. Like nobody. It's just that idea that she's like, be there or regret it for the rest of your life. That's what it was. It's to me, it was just like, that's amazing. It almost seems like too good to be true.
I don't know exactly what she told the DJ that she did. I know that she did get a mention in that radio show. That, by the way, is a legendary kind of German music show called Radio Tech. That was like kind of at the tip of all great music coming out of there. Because back then, when you think of Germany in the years of this film, it's Cannes, it's Neu, it's Kraftwerk, you know, with the beginning of electronic music. There's just so much stuff happening. I mean, Bowie and Iggy and all of these guys are coming to Berlin. There's just so much happening in Western Germany at the time that I think Vera, even though she deals with jazz, is kind of the embodiment of this like cauldron of culture that's happening there.
I think it's quite apropos that there's that scene, beautifully filmed, by the way, where she's at a Miles Davis concert, like a 1973 Miles Davis concert, where he's seriously into his funk music and a lot of very atonal trumpet parts. But I think that is basically sort of like letting the audience know, you think you know jazz. Jazz is not any one thing. And you're talking a lot, Tim, about the punk spirit. And Vera being at a Miles Davis show of that era, I think is very punk rock.
Absolutely. Because, I mean, like, you know, Miles at the time, he got influenced by the Stooges.
I understand that neither Keith nor Manfred Eicher wanted any part of this film. I mean, how did the conversations go? Did you reach out to them and they ignore you, or did they come back and say, don't do this, we don't approve this? How did that go?
We checked with them early on and they said, we don't want any part in this. And one of the things that I managed to do is actually get in touch with Keith's brother, Keith Jarrett, who's, by the way, a great pianist. And he kind of served as like the liaison and like kind of vetted the script and kind of watched the film. And one of the biggest compliments I've received is when he said, you know what, this kind of checks, I feels authentic and it kind of reminds me of my brother. Keith is a very special person. We try and show it in the film and try and explain it. And like you said, you know, you compared him to Kurt Cobain. Is it these, you know, tortured geniuses that walk among us and have, it almost feels like they're wearing, that they don't have the layer of skin that a lot of us have, but they're like kind of exposed flesh in terms of sensitivity. For him, my understanding is that, you know, this concert is like his creep, you know, for Radiohead. It's like that one thing that everyone is talking about. I mean, he was 29. He played one night. He didn't have fun. He then released it, but he's played better concerts musically speaking. It just, because the piano was broken, something special happened and it connected with a mass audience and it sold millions and it became such a high-selling album and it transformed his career. It doesn't mean that the man likes it. He's tired of it. He's played dozens and dozens and dozens of concerts since. He doesn't want to talk about this and he doesn't want more attention brought to it. So that's one thing. But there's a darker side to it that I don't want to ignore. And that's the fact that they've never said thank you to Vera Brandes. Nobody has ever given this woman the credit that she deserved.
Wow.
And for me, there was something, it wasn't right. We celebrate the artists, we put the people on the spotlight, but there's like an army of people behind every artist that make it possible, right? And this film felt like it could also be a correction to the historical record to say, hey, this guy played an incredible piece of music, but without her, this beautiful piece of music doesn't exist in the world. So I wanted to create something that was still a love song to Keith Jarrett, still a love song to his music, still try to understand why he is the way he is. But at the same time, it's her movie. And I was not going to let anyone, not the label, not him, tell her that she's not allowed to have her story told.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And that's what I was saying earlier about, you know, I don't care how amazing of a magician you are. If you don't have the people that see the magic and you don't have the people that witness the magic, then it doesn't matter what the magic is. It's a balance of all factors. You know? And that's what I was trying to get at earlier, is that it's this whole symbiotism of promoters. That's the incredible thing now, is that we know amazing artists who did poster work for shows. We know the amazing sound guys and the people who recorded all this stuff. But nobody ever says, did you ever hear about that legendary promoter? Like, you never hear about the promoter. Very few promoters are really lauded, where they're the ones that have their ear to the ground, that do all the legwork, that bust their ass, that sometimes have to put, I can't pay the rent next month, but because next month's rent money is going to pay this guy because I love this guy. You know, like, I mean, nobody really gives the love song to the promoter, and that's what you have done here.
Yeah, it was also an opportunity because I felt like there were so many music films that have the artist at the center, and they kind of feel like they're the same movie with a different soundtrack a little bit. And I'm not going to name movies, but you guys know probably what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And here was a way to tell the story of a musician, but tell it inside out, kind of from behind the scenes, looking into the audience, not the usual way.
And yet Vera's journey throughout this movie is very similar to a musician's journey in a more conventional musical story or biopic or whatever you want to call it, because she starts out with something, hey, I have an idea, I'm going to pursue this. And she has people saying, no, you can't do that. And she says, oh, yes, I can. And I'm going to. And she faces all manner of obstacles, in this case, stodgy owners of the Cologne Opera House, the musician himself, and yet by the end, spoiler alert, but not really, she triumphs and she has this moment, beautiful moment of catharsis. I'm not going to give it away, that you show towards the very end, which in its way is still very similar to what we see in a lot of musical biopics. She has the musician's journey, but it's just in this case, as Tim has been saying, we're honoring her as promoter. And I might also say that, and you've already gone and indicated this yourself, Ido, is that just because this is Vera's story predominantly, I find that Keith is presented three-dimensionally. It would be very easy to sort of say, oh yeah, he was the pain in the ass, he was the obstacle, he was the prima donna, right. But you don't do it like that. He's a supporting character, but he's presented, I think, equally three-dimensionally and sympathetically, which...
I agree. I think you watch this film and you have more patience. YouTube is filled with clips of Keith yelling at audience members.
I do not speak Italian, so someone who speaks English can tell all these assholes with cameras to turn them fucking off right now. Right now. No more photographs, including that red light right there. If we see any more lights, I reserve the right, and I think the privilege is yours to hear us, but I reserve the right, and Jack and Gary reserve the right to stop playing and leave the goddamn city.
If you cough one more time, we're leaving. We're leaving. And I think you watch this film and maybe you have a little more patience for that. You're not just saying, what an asshole. And I think that was important. It's a love song for this man and his music.
Right. And the one thing I wanted to say, too, was what I really loved with what you did was that with Vera's parents, where her father's like, no fucking way, and he just wallops her, no spoiler. But her mother, a lot of other movies would just say, okay, here's the money, go follow your dream. But no, her mother says, I challenge, I'm putting the money down. If you don't pay me back, you're becoming a dentist. Like she actually says, put your money where your mouth is. You got the money now. Let's see what you can do. And I really admired that because it wasn't just, okay, here, my daughter, go chase your dream. No, the mother was just saying, okay, the money's down. Let's see what you can do. Okay, I expect you to pay me back on this. And that was fantastic.
And by the way, if you go to Cologne now and you find the house where she grew up, which is still there, there's a dentist working out of that same clinic. And it's still Dr. Brandes, but it's Vera's brother.
Oh, wow.
Shit, really? I wonder if he lets you use the gas.
I'm your dentist, and I get off on the pain I inflict.
It's interesting because you talked about like the beginnings of this project and that someone you worked with said, oh, I found Vera Brandes and she's living on a beach in Greece. Where's the spark of the idea that led you to even decide to do this project? Did someone actually say, hey, did you know about this? Or
no, I read it in a magazine article. I picked up a magazine. There was a small article about this final day. And I thought, okay, perfect idea for a film, but the creation, the art of creation, all of that. And I started showing it to people. And a lot of people said, it's not enough. It's one day. There's not enough for a film. But once we found her, I'm a stubborn man. And once I insisted, and then we went and we found her and she gave her story, then it was, okay, we have something here.
That's a great story. I mean, I love the sort of guerrilla concert promoting. that was fascinating.
That's how she did it.
As Maurice said, they're all people. I mean, they're all portrayed as people. I mean, the father, he's not everyone's favorite person, but you see when he does hug her and everything, and you feel the sort of the pain that he feels. And the mother, same thing, and they're in this weird dynamic. Even the brother, who is antagonistic, at least during a good portion of the film, you see they have a moment. I thought that was pretty neat. But the friends, I found myself going, I wish I had a friend that I knew from when I was a young girl that like we got on these adventures together and stuff like that. It was I really admired that relationship, and you showed it really well, and I think you showed the relationship among all those people, that core group, really well. Like, because when she comes back and knocks on when they're in the bus stop and they're all acting silly, and she comes back and knocks on it and she's like, I need you. They just come running. And I just thought, it's real friendship. This movie was unexpected for me. I try not to read anything about a movie before I'm going to see it. So I didn't. I didn't read anything. I didn't watch any trailers. I just went into it blind. And this was not at all what I was expecting. And it was such a pleasant surprise. Really, what an entertaining film. Because you can make one day. I mean, there are movies that are like, it's one day. I was connecting with the people who were being jerky, the people who were being maybe a little bit prima donna-ish, but not exactly. And there's a background story there. And I could relate to a lot of different stuff. I just found it so entertaining.
I have to give credit to this incredible gang of actors.
They were wonderful.
In doing this, especially the young actors who play the friends, who, went into this not knowing me specifically and having smaller parts. And before we shot, I insisted on us going to some country house in Germany where we hung out. We just hung out for a long time. And I told them, this is your movie. She's your leader. Forget about me. I'm like the boring dude who comes and like tells you what to do and like has to like count money and afford things and like all this stuff that I have to do that's not part of the job. But like I told the kids, like, it's your movie, run, go, just never stop. Always try and push the limits of what we're doing and feel the freedom. Don't let anyone kind of encumber you with rules or what you need to do or where you need to go. And I think they ended up feeling that way, that there's a freedom there. And I think that kind of transcends into what you're describing.
Well, it worked. I mean, the casting was really wonderful. There were some actors that I was unfamiliar with, but now I'm going to look for other things that they've done because, my goodness, just what a great crew.
Can we talk a little bit about the two main characters in the film in terms of, the actors? So Marla Emder, who, I looked up her background and she's made, I don't know, something at least listed about 10 films or something like that and a lot of television. She'd been nominated for awards and it certainly seems to me like she's been highly regarded in Germany. How did you come across her? Did she just come to a normal audition process or had you sought her out because there was something she'd done that you admired?
I didn't know anything about the landscape over there, so I started watching and I drove everyone crazy. We cast for like a year. And I asked for tapes at first. I asked to watch. I started watching and then we made long lists. And then I started asking for tapes from specific actors. And I took them through rounds and rounds, sending tapes. I would send them letters. And then slowly as the pool shrank, I would send personal letters. I would say, I'm really sorry. I'm just asking for another round. Can you do this and that? And we looked at like unknown actors and actors out of performing schools and people on Instagram and also people who have done a lot like Mala. But the truth is that the moment I showed up to like actual physical casting and she walks into the room, there's this feeling that happens when a real movie star is in your vicinity, this like change in frequency. You feel it a lot if you go to LA and you go and you meet real big kind of stars and you feel this like whiplash of charisma. I can't really explain it. And she had that. Like you felt like a lion walked into the room. It was very clear that she was the one for this. And I was lucky enough to have her join me. And I said, again, this is not my film. It's our film. We're partners, collaborators. You tell me what you want to do. And I told the cameraman, every time she does something, we follow her. I'm going to tell her, make mistakes as much as you can, because mistakes are what this film is all about. And if she moves, and by the way, if we see a modern thing behind her and you know that you can't, or like your light is in the way, but she felt like going this way, you're going to turn and you're going to film it. And we're going to find a way to deal with it. And that's how we made the film.
I love that.
Did Vera Brandes have to have a say as to who was going to portray her, or did she just say, it's your film?
No, she was super gracious. She read the script. She gave me, I think, 3 notes, and out of them I took maybe 1, and we had the discussion about all 3. And she said it. She completely let go. She came to the opening party of the shoot. In Germany, they do an opening party, which is very strange for me, because usually, why party? You haven't done anything yet. They call it the warm-up, and they all have a little party. And like literally the next day, you have to wake up at 6 a.m. and start shooting. So for me, it sounds insane, but that's what they do. So she showed up, and I told her, give them something. And she gave a speech. She said, it's incredible. Like, she was a woman in her, I think, late 60s, standing there in front of, 150 maybe people who were there to tell her story. And I think everyone felt that and felt that it was important. And then she showed up to a couple of other shooting days, and she showed up to the scenes in the household with the father, and she couldn't take it. For her, it was too much because it felt so close to what she went through. And she was like, I'm out of here. I can't. And that's it. And then the next time she just saw the completed film. That's it. And in Berlin, when we premiered, and again, you go to Berlin, it's like a 2,000 seat auditorium. It's really big. And the film ends and people stand up and clap as she walks up on stage. And then I look at her and I see her being seen. And feeling like, okay, now people know what I did. And like, finally, and it all came full circle from where we started, where we called her up and she said, finally, someone wants to tell my story.
That's incredible. One thing that I really love is the fact is there's a moment in your film when her father is talking to her saying, Germany was destroyed and I had to come back from nothing to be who I am today. And Vera's doesn't say the same thing to him, but she's like, I can relate to nothing of the past. And this is what fuels me to what I am today. And what I love about that is that when you actually play Can in your film, all the krautrock was basically saying, we start over. We are the phoenix that come out of the ashes of Germany. We relate to nothing of the past. Schlager, all that music, all that crap, it's gone. We start over. We clean the slate. And that's what Vera is trying to do. So I think actually in one weird way, her and her dad are coming from the same thing at 2 different angles. Yeah. Where her dad's saying, I'm trying to start over. And she's saying, I'm trying to start.
Right.
Does that make sense? I mean, that's just what I got from it. But I mean, that's what I got from the feeling of that communication between the two.
Yeah, I think for sure it's a theme running through every German story from those years. The kind of collapse of the old guard and the way the young people felt about their parents' generation and how they let them down. And, this is post-60s going out into the street.
Well, even when they protest, the 2 girls. Right.
And you have a problem where half of the German kind of administration is housed with former Nazis who were just like kind of one day came back and said, now we're just administrators. And that's how the government ran. And there was a whole generation of young people saying, no. We're not letting you guys restart. We are starting a new chapter. And that's exactly what you just said about the relationship between her and him.
So I also wanted to talk about your other lead actor character, John Magaro, as Keith Jarrett himself. Now, I didn't realize this till I looked it up in IMDb, but I had seen him in a quite recent film called Past Lives. And I'm thinking, oh, wow, this guy's got range because his character in that is completely different to how Keith Jarrett is. And I wanted to know, what did he go through in terms of how he was going to play Keith? Were you and him watching together a lot of performance videos? Were you watching a whole lot of interviews? Because it seemed to me like when he's on stage at the Lausanne concert, say, for instance, and his hand, like you see at one point the fingers, and I don't know if it was John or you had a professional pianist's fingers do that bit, but you see the like 4 fingers on the one piano key as he's starting that motif off. But but his body movement is very deliberate. And just to sort of move aside for a second, there was a film that I watched many, many years ago. We just spoke about on the podcast called 32 Short Films about Glenn Gould. And the main actor in that, Colin Concert, he's got very deliberate movement that Glenn Gould had. And in some ways, I sort of see maybe Glenn Gould and Keith Jarrett as simpatico in terms of their approach to the piano, but one's doing classical. I mean, Keith Jarrett's nowadays doing classical as well, but at the time, anyway, we're talking about improvisational music and classical, which Glenn Gould was also not going to stick to the established order of the way of doing things. But anyway, I'm rambling on here, but I guess the crux of my question was, how did John prepare for that role?
Look, first is when I had to cast someone to play Keith Jarrett, I felt like that was a very, very dangerous thing because Keith lends itself so easily to caricature in the way that he wears his hair back then, in the way that he moves his body. It's so easy to exaggerate. It's so easy to make it look just acted, superficial, just someone mimicking someone who already looks like they are doing something really big. So for me, it was about finding an actor like John, who is really known for honest performances. He's done a lot of work through the years, and he's really respected as a character actor here in the States and I think around the world. And what you notice when you watch him act always is how subtle he is always, how he underperforms always, and how he's really honest about everything. It's always about honesty with him. And so I sent him the script, and when he was interested enough, I started meeting him and we started talking about Keith and what it means to be Keith back then. I sent him a bunch of books to read, and then we got him a coach, and for months he trained here in New York with a piano coach, not just on playing the pieces that he plays in the movie. And he knew some piano, so it wasn't that hard to kind of teach him, but it was about making it right for the way Keith moves his body, but also not making it too much so it doesn't look like an actor pretending they're doing something that's too big. And I went there and I sat watching them a lot, and they would watch clips of Keith play from the time, by the way, because it's a little different. Like he doesn't move his body the same way in 1975 than more the modern late stage Keith, let's say. So it was about finding the right balance between copying what the man does and not copying it so much so it feels exaggerated and fake. And it was finding that took a while, and he practiced a lot. At some point, we sent him a piano to his flat so he could practice at home. And then at some point, we felt it was right. And then I told him, okay, stop, because we're not in the business of mimicry here. And now you have to create your own thing and just take it. And it doesn't, you don't have to copy Keith. You have to make your own version of that. And I think he came to Germany already thinking about that, in that kind of mindset of, okay, this is not a job where I have to copy someone. I have to create myself in Keith.
And I noticed the name Stefan Rusconi, who was, I guess, either your composer of incidental music, and I'm presuming it's Stefan's piano that we hear like during the Lausanne moment in the film. And he does a very good interpretation of wanting to sound as authentic as he could to the spirit of what Keith was doing at the time. I mean, was Stefan already, I'm presuming he's well steeped in the music of Keith Jarrett, but did he have to sort of like go through a process where he would not play like Stefan, but play in a way that we could recognize as being Keith Jarrett?
So first of all, the film has two composers. So one is Hubert Wolkowski, and he did the non-diegetic kind of score. And then Stefan Rusconi, like you said, he composed the piano pieces that we hear. Stefan was just a Keith freak from like a young age. He studied piano trying to understand how Keith plays. So he didn't have to do anything other than being himself, because that's the way that he was brought up. And then I came to him and I said, hey, I want to recreate these concerts. I'm giving you a piece that Keith did play, so you can play that. So, you know, one piece that Keith plays in the film is a piece that Keith recorded. And I said, play that. You can hear how Keith does it, really do it the same way, but then improvise on top of that as Keith would do, and then recreate another piece in the spirit of Keith. And it was a great exploration. You know, at first we tried different things, it didn't work, and he just like kept finding it. But for me, it wasn't an effort, because he was really, that was his focus in life. Like, he grew up being a complete Keith fanatic.
You've talked about different things that you did, like the meeting together in the German, like a B&B where you go, or whatever, where you guys all stayed together in a big German house, and then things like sending a piano to Margaro's house and working with all these people. I read a lot and I hear a lot about movies being made, and it's mostly like slam bam, thank you, ma'am, you know, unless they're like huge budget, like some Tom Cruise epic or something. That's really wild that you were able to do all that pre-film get-together stuff and practice and meetings and conversations. That's fascinating. So, I mean, how were you able to do that?
I think the thing you learn about the job of being a film director is that it's just about having fire and about making sure everyone catches the fire that you have. And if people truly sense that you have a fire for something, a lot of the times they align with you and follow. And I think it was about kind of getting the fire from Vera and saying, okay, now I am the messenger of her. Now I move around the world with that purpose and that intention and that fire. And I'm going to light everyone that deals with me with that same fire so that they do the best that they can do with the limited amount of resources that we have. And people will change the world if the right fire is lit, you know?
So I want to say congratulations to Ido on being an incredible arsonist. One thing I wanted to say, that, you know, in no way, shape, or form is what Keith did was ever easy. But what you were talking about, it kind of took me back to a thing about like the Ramones or AC/DC or somebody where it's like, you can play that stuff, but you're not going to play it like that.
Yeah.
Anybody, like, I mean, certain people can learn to play what somebody is playing, but you're never going to be that person and in that skin and playing it like they play it. And so I really admire that you had someone that came as close as you could to doing what needed to be done.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, it was an obstacle, but we have to find a way around. The man didn't want his music in the film. I wasn't going to not make the film. So we had to find a solution. And part of it was, by the way, sending you home to listen to the record when you finish watching the film. Best thing about this film, and what I get from audiences all over the world, you know, we just opened in Finland, we're in Canada, we're now in the US, that's why we're meeting. Like, the film is really, really playing all over the world. And people keep sending me letters and they're saying, I knew the album, I watched the film, I listened to the album again. It's not the same album. Oh. It's a new album. And I think that's the best thing about art, right? It's right. When you know about the intention behind it, the stories behind it, the interpretations, it changes the thing itself. It makes it something new.
Right. You gain new angles, gain new perspective. Is you think you knew it all until, oh, wait, there's more. And then you get bored, you're going, oh, shit, I didn't even think of it that way. That's the incredible thing. Years ago, I saw an interview with the singer David Thomas from this band Perubu. And an interviewer said to him, well, how can you be the same band and do so many different songs and so many different styles? And he says, well, what is this? And they said, well, it's a glass. And he tilted it. He said, well, what is this? And they said, it's a glass. And they put it sideways. He says, what is this? It's a glass. It's the same glass with different angles. And that's what it's all about. It's just being given privy access to different angles, to different understanding.
You've said that the film has already been premiered in parts of Europe. We're recording this late September, just before the film's wider release in America, although it's had some festival screenings there. And I'm very much looking forward to an Australian premiere, of course, in the cinema. I'd love to see it on the big screen. But thus far, what's been the reaction to it, A, from film fans, and B, from fans of Keith's work?
I think I only hear the positive stuff. I'm sure there's some people who watch the film and are turned off by the lack of seriousness, maybe by the lack of Keith, by the focus on her and not on him. There's a bunch of reasons I may imagine that people might be turned off. But so far, everything I'm hearing is musicians writing and feeling seen, promoters and behind the scenes people who email me and say, I feel seen. I feel like you showed something that I never see in movies, which is like the work of those type of impresarios and equivalating, that is showing how important they are. I try not to listen too much to everything coming back to me because it's toxic sometimes to listen to the good things. I read somewhere someone said, if you start listening to the good things, you have to start listening to the bad things and believe all of it. And you know, I try to insulate myself a little bit, but I know that the film does something really special where people watch it, they go home, they go on Wikipedia, they check that I didn't just lie to them for an hour and a half. They're like, okay, this really happened. That's really incredible. Then they put on the record and they're blown away, whether they know it already or not. And for me, that's the best kind of experience of giving something out to the world. Yeah. And it's amazing how universal it is, whether it's people from Finland writing to me now because that's where it's opening, or Spain, where we had a very successful opening, and of course Germany and France and all these places. And you know, next are the US, Canada, and the UK, I think, down the line, Italy. We keep trucking.
And the Southern Hemisphere, don't forget us.
No, I'm not forgetting. Stores open. I'm not sure if it was picked up in Australia, this film. I'm not 100% sure if it was and who picked it up. I'm not like on the day-to-day.
Who do I have to punch?
I just wanted to say one thing is this: thank you so much for doing this, because as Kerry said, she had no idea going in. I was the same way. And this film spoke to me on so many levels that, like I said right from the get-go, punk rock, about DIY, doing it from the street, doing it from conviction. It's the people that make the magic. People say the magicians make the magic happen. No, it's the people with the open eyes that give access to the magic to make the magic happen. And Vera is the living testament of that. And for that, I say to Vera, thank you. This is the thing, is that in North America, we are giving everything on a plate. Even back in the 70s, you know, there was so much television, so much accessibility to things. But in Europe, there was so much limitation on a lot of things. And you really had to dig. You really had to dig. And I'm glad that Vera pulled the veil away and really was able to show people in her country what could be seen. You know, she could show them the magic. So I want to thank you for making your film and doing what you did. And I wish you nothing but the best success.
Thank you so much. And thanks for watching and listening. It's all we can ask for these days.
It's a pleasure.
Thanks for coming and talking with us.
Of course. Thank you.
Well, okay, we'll be back in a moment to talk about what we're going to be organizing for next episode. But once again, huge thanks to you, Ido. Much appreciated for your time. And we'll be back in a moment. You're listening to See Here, episode 130. Our huge thanks once again go to Ido Fluk and to the publicist Sasha Berman for arranging this. Thank you very much, Sasha. We hope that you enjoyed that discussion and truly hope that you get a chance to see Koln 75. Even if you don't find that you're a fan of jazz music, that's not the point of this film. You just have to be a fan of creativity. You have to be a fan of having the spirit to bring something to life, because really, ultimately, that's what this film is about. And it's a coming of age story, I guess, in a way. We didn't sort of bring that up, but yeah, it is. There's a lot of things, a lot of aspects to this film. It's a great story. And I can't remember who it was that said to me recently, but it's true. All the best music films are not really just about music. And Koln 75 is the spirit of that saying. So Kerry is going to reveal what we are going to be talking about next month.
And talking about movies about music that aren't entirely about music, Nashville.
Oh, my Lord. Why have we never covered that on this show? And it's only our second Robert Altman film. We did A Prairie Home Companion as our third episode. That might have been, I'm not sure if that was my pick or Bernie's pick, but long time ago. So yeah, about time we came back to Robert Altman. Nashville, wonderful choice. I think we're going to need like a 5-hour episode for that one. So much going on.
There's a lot, yeah.
Nashville, I'm easy.
Was it a top 40 hit?
It was a hit around in the States. It was anyway. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I look forward to having a conversation about that. Thank you very much, Kerry, for picking that one. Wow. Why have we not done that earlier? I know. We were waiting for Kerry to suggest it. Actually, I think we keep coming back to the country music movies with you, Kerry, because
I know.
Which is a good thing. It's a good thing.
You weren't around when we did Paycheck, right?
No, actually, that might have been done with Bernie, I think.
Right.
We did that before the Gents did, so we're ahead of the curve. Great, that was a great
We're
film.
the cool kids.
Yeah, exactly. All right, as per usual, wonderful to have our conversations together. Kerry, Tim, love you both. And until we meet again, look after each other, be nice to each other. Go see Koln 75 if it shows up in your neighborhood.
It's excellent. Such a good film.
Until next time, all the best. Cheers.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.